Yes, welcome back. We're chatting motor racing here on Inside Sports. Honestly, we need more young black drivers to take up the sport. But the financial constraints then come into play. But LETLAKA has some firm ideas of how to get around that. CHOPS mentioned just before the interval that go-karting is a less expensive sport, but we'd like to get more black guys and girls into the more elite events of motorsports. Talk to us about, how a young child will still have confidence in a very expensive sports like motorsports.
CHOPS is correct. The foundation of any sport is to groom these young men and girls from an early age. Give them the correct basics. I was saying in another interview that I was blessed to have CHOPS in the car this past weekend, explaining how we could get quicker in this car and the value of him explaining this in our own language is XOLILE. I guess if I were to quantify that, he made me 3 seconds quicker than my quickest time. So it's important to groom them. Then let's talk about how we could make the sport accessible. Unfortunately, in this country, we've not had an opportunity of putting up a uniform and appealing motorsport series. What do I say by appealing? We need international investors to come in and see how we are performing here, how we are running our teams, how we can compete in equal footing with them. GT3 racing, which is part of what we do at SACRA, actually promotes that. It takes the sport and exposes it internationally based on the international rules and making sure that the eyes of the international community focus on us. By doing that, you can now get the young boys that come out of karting, that come out of our polo series, then they can come into GT3. We can get the world to come and race with us here.
Wow.
That's how we can really promote and make the sport less expensive.
I love your answer in the approach that motorsports needs to take, and CHOPS in particular. You vaguely get full support from SASCOC in elevating the sport in the country. So what do partners and sponsors need to do with the rest of those that are passionate about motorsports within the landscape of motorsports to bring it to the level that we all wish that it can compete at a global and international level?
Firstly, I think there has got to be a meeting of the minds with all the stakeholders involved, whether it was SACRA, whether it was Motorsport South Africa, whether it was Corporate South Africa, because the bulk of the sponsorship money that propels a driver internationally, locally, and everywhere in the world comes from the corporate environment. So you find that most of the time, a factory team will work with all its suppliers. If I could just make an example. So if you took Mercedes, as an example, they'll have a fuel sponsor, they'll have a computer sponsor, they'll have another technological sponsor that works generally with the factory. So all those people are brought together to make this thing work. And once it works, the sky is the limit. So in saying that, if you pulled together resources in understanding what the end goal is supposed to be, I mean, South Africans are multi-talented in different facets. We find that a guy like Jody Scheckter won a championship before the likes of anybody else in South Africa. He was a South African. So you get now the Van der Linde boys. You get another guy now who's sponsored by XOLILE, Stuart White, a guy who's competing in the GT class in Europe as well. So going back to what XOLILE has said, the focus is not about being black, white, or whatever the color may be. It's about bringing together holistically people of color, people of various backgrounds together and making them perform. And this is where you are going to then extract the best engineers, the best mechanics, the best of the best, if you bring them early into the sport and make them understand why it is important to be an engineer, so on and so forth.
XOLILE, I'm hearing just, the history of motorsports in South Africa. Let's take a trip down memory lane. 1984, one of the most pivotal and paramount sporting events in the country took place when the Formula One Grand Prix took place in East London in 1984. And of course, the late and F1 legend Ayrton Senna was one of the guys that was amongst the starting lineups. And as Chops had mentioned, it's not really about black, white, colored, Indian, but let's really think about it. In a sport where we've only had Europeans or white people dominate, when a black person finally achieves that record and achieves that milestone, I reckon that we've done so much generational healing that not even, just like some of the top guys in the sport have said, not even a government can achieve in this present day.
I want to agree with Chops. We are a beautiful nation. All of us, black and white, we are probably of one dream and goal. The problem here is that the one part of society has been left behind, which is predominantly black people. Now, every one of us, whether you are in cricket, rugby, motorsport, as me and Chops and other people, we have to strive to level the playing grounds. We have to bring in the people that have been left behind. We have to do it honestly. We must strive and do this honestly to give an opportunity to people of color to come forward. Going back to East London and the talent that we have here, it is heartbreaking to see what is happening in all our race circuits. You go to East London, one of the most historic circuits we've ever had in this country. If you see the condition of the circuit and how it's going to ruin, and we are here, we could do better, we could preserve this history, and we can make it better. It is just not about the circuit alone. It is what exactly Chops was saying. If we could take this investment and make it better, look at a track like Pakisa that has history. Valentino Rossi won there. You go today in Pakisa, it is a shame to go and see such investment by government going to ruins and not even preserving that history. It is utter shame. Now, these are little things that we can do, all of us together. Promoting the circuits, availing opportunities of young kids, getting sitters to now train engineers, convincing overseas factories to come and test here. We have the most beautiful weather. In fact, we're a continent of 1.2 billion people that don't feature in motorsport.
Wow.
How can we sit and just watch this go by?
Wow.
How can we?
Wow.
It's a shame.
Wow.
We need all of us to rise up. We need to back legends like Chops to come out of retirement. You know, I keep saying this. Without Chops and the help of Stradali, I wouldn't be standing here. And I do not in any way think that I am in the caliber of Chops Sipunga and Guguzulu and all those people. If we can bring these guys to nurture the next generation of motor race drivers in this country, we would have done this motorsport industry a big favor.
Wow, we love big favors in South Africa. Hopefully motorsports in the country will be at that level. Very quickly before the next interval, Mr. Chops, 3 most important factors to consider when wanting to become a professional driver in South Africa in particular.
Well, I think one of the most important one is the ability not to give up. You've got to be relentless. You've got to be a person that's when people say no, you must be saying yes. So you must also be thinking when people reject you, they're probably making a mistake because they don't understand the other part of you and what you can bring onto the table. Because generally it was always like that. With me, I persevered because when I got the opportunity to meet Terry Moss, I phoned him non-stop till he was convinced that I must come and see him at a race meeting, and I watched him race, and after I'd watched him race, I still said I wanted to race. So it looked quite scary and quite daunting. So I think in a nutshell, you must just have the ability of being a relentless person.
Couldn't have said it better. I mean, you're hearing from the legends themselves, just describing what it takes, rather, to become a legend in the sport and, of course, in this country. Okay, we're down to the last minutes. How many minutes left? There 11 minutes on the clock. I'm sure they could go through 11 minutes of that track again and bring us just that sense of appreciation and passion for South Africa as they take us through that race that took place in East London. It was the SA Endurance Series. I'm about to ask them questions on passing the baton to the next generation of motorsport stars. Stay with us on eNCA. You're watching Inside Sport.